Good morning, everybody. I am so excited to be here. Kyler and I are going to be discussing what does it mean when you're building confidence as an entrepreneur? Because we all know that confidence shows up some days, other days it's a little difficult to be found, but things that we've kind of learned along the way to help us show up better as business owners in the entrepreneurial world. So thank you so much for joining me. And I like that we've color coordinated our outfits in a Valentine's way in the early fall.
Yes,
It's the way to go.
absolutely.
So, yeah, I think one of the biggest things, and I don't know, this word just for everybody listening, this is kind of just more raw footage of kind of what we're thinking along the way and just, whatever questions you guys have. But ways that it has been just building a business coming from scratch, but also coming from corporate settings where sometimes you get beat up along the way and your confidence gets lost and having to go back and rebuild it. And those things that are innate to you of those particular skill sets and ways that you show up of kind of growing them back and being confident in those spaces again. So I think I would love to know. You've worked a little bit more corporate life than I have. Of just what is that like, and are there certain ways that they've shown up really well to help you
Mhm.
versus ways that it's you go home at night, you're like, oh my gosh, why am I even here
Oh,
still?
yeah. Yeah, well, I think corporate training grounds are hard for someone that's an entrepreneur because being an entrepreneur by nature, you push boundaries, right? That's kind of you struggle in a lot of red tape type of environments because you want to do things like innovate and push the envelope and be more creative in those types of means. Even if you're a technical person, you want to be able to kind of push new code or push new systems. And in corporate environments, especially the bigger, the Fortune 100 companies that I've been at, that is harder to be able to do. So I think that that's challenging. I will say that especially for newer founders, corporate backgrounds do add a level of structure that you're going to need to put together for your investors. If you do have any sort of private funding, being able to understand what a business case looks like, how you report in on certain metrics. So, when people are like, I'm an entrepreneur and, I never want to be in corporate, that's totally fine. But there are some benefits of that, even knowing that it might not be your end goal. Learning that organizational structure is something that I feel like could benefit. It definitely benefited me. So I think that that's something that I learned from that is just that need for standardization that a lot of times we see entrepreneurial organizations struggle with.
Yeah, it gets a little chaotic sometimes with the entrepreneurial side of things because people are scrambling here and there. Lots of people wear the same hat as compared to corporate. And I didn't work corporate very long. I lasted about 3.5 years in total. But it's the same thing as showing up to meetings and you see things through a different lens of how it could be better and challenging that. And it's not well received because a lot of times it was, well, we've always done it this way. We don't need to change it. And you're like, well, actually, what if you did and
Yeah.
what might come from it? And I remember in a corporate job I had one of the guys in there, we were in the same meeting and I was the instigator, he was the debater. And we would go in kind of prepared of these are the things we need to discuss and be like, all
Mhm.
right, I got you, I'll go do this. And then he would just debate the living daylights out of them.
Mhm.
And it got to the point where they split us up because they didn't like what we were doing to the team meetings because we
Mhm.
were making people think in a way that they didn't want to have employees think.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting, but also sad at the same time
Mhm.
of kind of killing that vision and ideas that people do have and where they can add value to it. And yeah, I think about that a lot and I kind of just laugh at it too. I'm like, how silly was this? And
Mhm.
the day I went to leave and give in my notice, and they're like, really, you're leaving? I'm like, really, you're surprised? I'm like, really?
That's what I always was like, how is this a shock to you?
Yeah, like you knew all along the way. This is not something I'm made for, nor do I want to be here particularly. It's just helping me get to where I need to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting, and I think too of just the confidence that did come from that of being able to speak up in those settings where you know it's not going to be well received, you know that, you know, people might look at you differently or whatnot, and how it helps you to be bold and, you know, stand by what you think might work. And so that was something that helped in a lot of ways. And then also other ways, I'm like, oh gosh, what am I doing or thinking? Because people just look at me like, you know, speaking a foreign language.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, you know, there is a level at which you learn different collaboration factors, especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur that is in professional services. You have to understand like what that means to go into a professional organization and have, you know, a certain skill sets to have meetings organized and things like that. So corporate isn't always terrible, but it's certainly difficult for someone that is in more of an entrepreneur or desires an entrepreneurial lifestyle. I think as far as confidence, what we often see, especially, you know, being as women in a technical field, is the importance of representation. And that's what, you know, you don't see a lot of, you know, IT female leaders still today in 2025. A lot of times, you know, especially being younger in that, even, you know, physically small and petite, which Chrissy and I both, if you saw us in person, are just small people. And that piece of it is learning how to listen and bide your time until, you know, you really have a point to make. So I think that piece, especially in venture capital, which is still very male dominated, and, you know, just tech in general, is something that is important to have that experience so that you can kind of understand what the industry is like, whether that's good or bad, at that, you know, level of exposure.
Oh yeah, I completely agree on that. And I think too is you kind of learn to being put in those situations where you may not know the industry well and you're thrown into it. And that is one thing that's kind of nice about being with a team is you usually have people to lean on that know something that you don't. And when you do fall, they can, you know, help cushion that fall and teach you along the way. And that helps build that confidence, because I know I had that even in different jobs that, you know, weren't totally corporate. They were more smaller business side of things, but hey, I'm thrown into something like I've never done it at this caliber or this scale before. And it's intimidating. And I know I'm not showing up well because the fear is coming up of, oh, they're going to see that I'm the imposter in the room. They're going to laugh at me. And I think it's been really helpful along the years of just having really good teammates along the way and friends that have, you know, been at that level to help build that back up and be like, hey, it's okay. And you're going to fail at this multiple times. And it just depends on how you're going to get up from it and move forward. So it's just, yeah, it's interesting how that all works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And I think there's some good questions that are coming into that I like. This one by Mac, and it's, is there a turning point in your career where you settled into being confident into your skill set? I'll ask you first.
No, absolutely not. I mean, at the moment you settle or become complacent, I think the thing that I've been confident in settling into is trusting my instinct, right? I'm always building my skill set. But when I have an instinct about people, you know, that I might not want to work with or might not have an integrity match, that's when I've not trusted that so many times. And I've been, you know, confident in the last couple of years, especially owning my own business, of saying like, you know, that's not a match for us. We're not going to be, you know, participating in that. So really, you know, understanding the power of saying no, like I'm good. I don't know. But I think the minute as an entrepreneur you get comfy, that's when the fear should come up.
Yeah.
Because if you're getting comfy, then you're not hustling for your team. And that's really what you need to be pushing outside the boundary. That's why not everyone belongs in entrepreneurship. There's this weird narrative that we all drive like Range Rovers and work out from 11 to, you know, noon.
Right. Get up at 4:30 in the morning.
Like going to Monaco or like crazy things like that. And yeah, you know, sometimes we we do things like that, but it's much less glamorous than that, and it's a lot of hustle on behalf of what you're building. And that's the piece, at least for me. I don't know about you.
No, I would say the same thing. There's certain areas where I'm confident in, and to your point, it's that discernment of knowing what clients are right, what aren't. It's being able to read a room and kind of understand more the people side of things. But I think there's always this growth in the skill set that I have. I get to a point where, hey, I'm pretty confident in these things, but then there's always something new to grow into. And so I don't ever want to be 100% confident. It kind of sounds weird because I always want to be learning what else is out there.
Yeah.
And if I become so confident in all of it, to me, then I've stopped learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Great question, though.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. There's one more here by him, or actually Avery. Sometimes there can be a constant cycle of setbacks. How do you decide when a failure is just a lesson versus a sign to pivot? Well, that's good. I've had a lot of those over the years.
I think, yeah. I mean, you go first on this one.
I'll go first on this one. I think it's, for me, I have to sit and think about it sometimes and then get the emotion out of it and really look at it from a perspective of what is actually going on. And is that a lesson to be learned, or is it, oh gosh, we really need to walk away from this? And I've had clients where it gets off on a really, really bumpy start where I'm considering, I'm like, gosh, maybe this isn't the right fit. But it's having additional conversations around the way of like, oh, I just needed to learn something, and here's what I'm learning from it, versus other times where the pivot could be, hey, I really do need to walk away from something because, one, it's putting me into a flight or fight mode all the time. It's not allowing me to do the best work that I can. The client is never happy with anything, but yet for some reason they still want to stay working. And sometimes it's being able to pivot in those instances and just say, hey, you know what? It's better for us to part ways because this is the best for both of us. I don't know. I've had a lot of that, and I've had a lot of that recently over in the last year or so of just pivoting in ways that I never thought I would have to. But there are also lessons in those pivots of what not to do in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think, you have to have some resilience and redefine or reframe failure, right? When something quote unquote fails, you're allowed to define what is a failure. If a relationship fell apart, or, a contract fell apart, or a product didn't work, then that failure is just a redirection in the ability to find something that does succeed. I think the only way that you, in my opinion, go through that as an entrepreneur is by having a network, because you're never going to have all the answers. You're going to have to call the people that you trust, or call an expert in that area and be like, hey, I have this thing. I just want to talk through it with you real quick. I've done that to Christy constantly. I have this problem. I have, employee issue. I have, something like that I need to be able to discuss. So if you don't have an executive coach, you need a network to be able to understand and get that feedback, because a lot of times these people will see things that you don't see, right? Have you considered this? And you're like, absolutely not. I didn't consider that.
Because in that moment, you're like, I just got to get through this.
Yeah. So a lot of times I think a misconception about being an entrepreneur is you need to be, some level of having all the answers. And the most successful entrepreneurs I know don't ever pretend to have all the answers. They say, well, let me ask my so-and-so about that, or let me call so-and-so about that, so that I can get some more perspective, take all of those data points in, sit with it for a minute, like you mentioned, and then make the best decision I can, knowing that you might fail. And you got to be okay with that, because that's the point. Who's ever met an entrepreneur that's like, hey, I've never failed in my life? It's not possible. So if you choose this as your career, you've got to get real comfy with being able to say, oh, that was a mistake, or that was, that wasn't my best moment, or anything like that. The power of going back and apologizing, or of saying like, I should have done something different, is totally okay. And to me, that makes you a better leader because you're able to go to your team and be like, you know what, guys, that was a misstep on my part. Um, we shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have made that decision. And now we can go forward and do, X, Y, and Z planning for next time. Guarantee you they're going to respect you way more because they're human beings as well. And I guarantee you they've made mistakes too. Then as opposed to being like, oh, I didn't do that
Rumble,
wrong.
rumble,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
You're
So
like, no, we saw this.
yeah, absolutely. And the more that you try to be this weird deity to an organization because you built a company, well, those people helped you build the company, right? You just might have had the idea, you might have had the platform, but you certainly couldn't build it without the people there. So you might as well be honest with them and treat them with some sort of level of respect. And when you make a bad choice or have some sort of mini failure, but if you don't try, you're certainly never going to fail, and that's going to be that complacency.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a big thing, just even the last couple people I've had on my lives, of when you do talk about building trust within your team, and then when you do fail, if you have that trust, it makes the failure a lot less. Well, I mean, it can still come up really harsh, but at the same time, it actually helps in a lot of ways because you're able to be like, hey, you know what, I messed up here. This is what happened. Let's all move forward with it. And now you have this trust that you may not have had going into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something to be said about that versus organizations that like to point the finger, or they like to just say, well, fine, you did what you did, and be non-complacent about it too. There's kind of those two sides. So I think there's a lot to learn from it. And the entrepreneurial journey, I don't know, I think it bruises your knees and cuts you more than anything else ever will in life. And so it's not for the faint of heart, and you need to have a thick skin. You need to have tough knees that don't bruise and scrape very easily, and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's no, in my opinion, there's no room for ego in entrepreneurs. And I promise you, the entrepreneurs with the biggest ego will fail. It just will be on the stage that they fail on, right? They might have, a legacy of doing something like, building a massive platform, but you have to remember that massive platform, there's going to be an end line to that. And then they'll blow up in your face in a big public setting, or their company will fail because they were too proud to say, well, that was not the best. That was not
right. Like eventually it finds you with everything. And you see that with a lot of very well-known people. They're, everything eventually comes out, and there comes to an end to a lot of things. And then people that have done it right continue to keep that respect, and their company just looks a lot different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Here's another one too from Mick. Have you had to overcome people questioning your ability to get the job done? Yes, all the time. And I think because I'm small stature, it's kind of like, do you know what you're doing? Because I remember I had a client years ago, and I walked into the room, and he even told me, he's like, there's no way, you know what you're doing, and you won't be able to do this or that. And I was really, really angry. And I remember saying, well, that's fine. By the end of the week, you'll be apologizing, because I'm like, this is not cool. And by the end of the week, he did not fully apologize, but he's like, yeah, that was great. Really, really glad you were here. I'm like, okay, that's your way of apologizing, I guess. But there's those things. And I think some of it is being younger. People don't think you have to have years and years of expertise to be able to speak to something. And that's not always true.
Mm-hmm.
There's people that you're very gifted at your skill set, and you can read a room. You have all these other skills that kind of come in and make you very successful at what you do, versus somebody that studied it for years and is only subpar. Mm-hmm. And like the best example I can give with that is kind of like photography. So I did it as a side hustle for a long time. Never took a class, just picked up a camera one day with one of my friends, and we started doing photos. And here I get called to shoot with lots of musicians and being in the fashion world for a couple of seasons. But I never learned anything. It was just I had an eye for something that couldn't be taught. And there's certain things I think you either have the skill to do it or you don't, but then you also have the ability to learn it and really perform at a greater level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is a great question because, again, life is about perception.
Mhm.
Have you ever had to overcome people questioning your ability to get your job? I love personally when people question my
Yeah.
ability to get my job done, because the one thing that I've always known through all of the resiliency training that I got, in corporate America or just throughout my life, I always know I can get the job done. So that doesn't bother me in any way, shape, or form. And I also trust my team to get the job done. Because the people, been very intentional about the people we brought into the organization. And if they weren't able to get the job done, they would say that.
Yeah.
So for me, I think you also have to take a step back and think about how sad it is when people question other people's abilities. Like,
Mhm.
what do you how miserable and insecure must you be with your own life if you need to go out and openly say, well, I don't think you can do this. It's like, okay.
Yeah. And it's usually a self-reflection on their part because they're
Yeah.
not confident in what they're doing, and it's easier to point the finger at somebody else.
Yeah, my favorite though is, when I always have male founders trying to tell me what to do. I don't know if it bring it out in people, but they just love to do that. And my favorite is when they do I'll give you that advice for free, and you're like, oh yeah,
You're like, thanks.
thanks. I'll be sure to write that down. And I
Yeah.
mean, I think the thing about it is you learn how to get comfortable with that, of just saying, wow, thank you so much for that feedback. And then go on and live your life,
Yeah.
right? Don't let them, live rent free in your head, right? That then they're getting in there. But that takes a lot of wisdom, maturity, and practice. But once you get to that level, I think it's just,
You kind of just don't care, and
exactly.
you're much more powerful at being you and how you show up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've had it's really funny, the hairstylist that I have, we always talk about, for some reason we just have people that give us unsolicited advice without ever asking. Like the other day I walked out of church and it's hot outside, and this older lady comes up to me and she's like, are you wearing sunscreen? You should be wearing sunscreen. You should be wearing this brand. Do you wear this brand? I'm like, are you getting paid for this?
Yeah,
What is happening? And it's just those little things that I don't know, in those moments I'm like, do you not think that I wouldn't have sunscreen on? Do you those things of just people's opinions? And that's on a much easier level than people being like, hey, I don't think you know how to add 1 + 1. But it's really interesting of how I think as you grow and mature and be a good entrepreneur and have that confidence, that the people that aren't confident tend to question more, and they tend to give that unsolicited advice that you're like, I really don't need it, but maybe that's for you, and I can hold up a mirror and you can tell yourself that because I'm good.
For sure. And maybe it is good advice. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
But that is the point, is some people see, an entrepreneur as someone who's constantly on stage or coaching people and blah. And some are like that. Don't get me wrong. You have some that, give great advice, but there's others that, again, haven't had the privilege of going through the exercise of dropping their ego, and they need that for them. Because they have a C in their title, they think that they're supposed to say something profound at the other. But the most profound thing they could do is actually shut up and listen to their team, so that they could do what they're supposed to do, which is supporting them so you can build and scale to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just how to be a healthy leader in a lot of ways. And and I think that is one thing, particularly with entrepreneurship, is pride does come because some people are really good at what they do and success comes quickly. I see this a lot in the e-commerce world. They find a good product and overnight it's a multi-million-dollar company, but along the way they haven't gotten caught up to what's going on, and it's, well, look, I built this overnight, and you're like, congratulations, you did, but look at all of the years that you failed, and nobody saw the B-roll of that. They're just seeing this highlight reel of you made it overnight, you're a star. And I think that tends to feed the ego at times, and that pride starts to come in and be like, oh, all that praise. And it's like, oh gosh, if everybody actually knew the full story, they would look at it differently. And you would think of yourself a little bit differently, of being like, I'm proud of myself for where I've come, and whatever that looks like.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I listen to a lot of the podcast, How I Built This, because that goes through, the entrepreneur's journey. And you don't realize companies like Airbnb, right, it took 8 years to be profitable. And the 8 years would be the point where people are being like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, I think you might want to call it quits. And, they changed the entire hospitality industry.
Yeah.
And then you think about, like, I love always the Rent the Runway stories where people were like, okay, how are you going to get fashion brands to give you rental inventory? You crazy person.
Yeah.
And, they snuck into the Spanx office and like met the founder in the bathroom. Like, literally, I'm not saying you should stalk people.
Right.
It is not a linear journey.
Mm-mm.
And a lot of times, especially in funding rounds, when I hear an entrepreneur or someone that's looking for funding, I can tell you within the first 90 seconds if they're going to be successful in this conversation, whether they're looking for funding from us or anybody else. It's all about how they're showing up. And if they immediately show up in their fancy suit, and nothing against suits, but if the ego matches the suit, I immediately know, no, it's not gonna happen, or I'm not the right fit for you. Either way, it's totally fine. But I think that you're so right on that, is people think that it's like, oh, you woke up one day and you're like, I am an entrepreneur and I'm doing entrepreneur things, and that's just not how that works. So.
No, there's so much blood, sweat, tears. Like, I think every emotion that goes into the journey, it's not easy at all. And even when you get to the other side of it and you're starting to see that success, there's a whole nother level of hard that comes into play. It's, managing the team, it's continually scaling, it's building that team and making them be the best versions of what they can be as employees. So it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think this has been fun today. I always love this topic, and I've talked about it a lot. I've had a lot of people bring it up, of just as they're looking into going down the route of entrepreneurship, or even if they're in it and you have your own business and there's moments when you're questioning, hey, do I have, what it takes? And I've had so much failure. How do I learn from these? How do I get the right people in my circle to be able to be there for accountability, but also be there as the cheerleader, because we need that also. I think so many times it's easy to just, point out all the flaws and where you can do better in this and this, but not celebrating the little things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that is so well said. I think if you're looking to go into entrepreneurship as a career, you start talking to people that you admire so that you can start building those networks. Most of the people, that I've met that I call now, all that I did was reach out and say, hey, I really admire what you're doing. I was wondering if I could ask you these 3 questions. I wanted about 10 minutes of your time. I always say yes to those every single time, unless I miss them in my inbox. But if you want a piece of, my journey or what they've gone through, most of the time people are going to be pretty perceptive to that, because they needed people on their journey. They still do to this day. And remember, these are not people, business coaches are different, right? Investing in business coaches are totally different. But these are people that have a reciprocated relationship, not people you pay in those levels. They'll call you when you need them. But that's really the key to being successful, is having that network around you that's really going to be your board. I always call it, we don't have a board. We're still a private company. And so I often call it our board of directors, because it's just the people I call when I don't know what else to do. I think the other piece I would just say is find your own process and know that it's absolutely fine to be different than other people. I mean, I own the Confluential with Adam. We're also, married, but we're two very different people. If I have a problem, I'm going to do things like go for a walk and listen to, frequency music, or pray on it, or, do those types of, he's going to run the numbers until he can't sleep anymore. And those are two different processes. Not one is right, not one is wrong, but it's about finding what your process is to be and show up the best that you can possibly show up.
Yeah, 100%. And it helps just keep you even too. So like when things get hard, you're like, hey, I know I gotta go take a walk right now and really process this through and figure out how I'm gonna handle it, versus somebody else finds comfort and sitting, like you said, like Adam will run numbers until that's what makes sense, and kind of can move from there.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again for hopping on and chatting. And thank you, everybody, for all your great questions. As always, you can reach out to me through LinkedIn or Christy@ChristyBarber.com. You can always reach out to Kyler as well through LinkedIn or Kyler the Confluential. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye. Thanks, guys.